As you're coming on, just know you're not alone here. We're just allowing people to kind of file in, and as we get going, we'll go ahead and provide some directions and get into the agenda and the presentation. But just hang tight while we get all of our people who registered online. All right. Just to let everyone know as you're coming on, we're just waiting for people to file into the meeting. So go ahead and just hang tight and we'll get started in just a few moments. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're just waiting for people to get online, so just hang tight. As soon as we get enough people on, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. If you're just coming on, just know we're waiting for everyone to get on and get situated, and we'll go ahead and get started in just a few minutes. Good morning, everyone. We're still seeing quite a few people file in, so we're just going to give a couple more minutes for people to jump on. And as soon as we get to a critical mass, we'll get started. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hi, everyone. We're just giving some time for everyone to jump on, so just hang tight and we'll get started momentarily. Morning, everyone. We just people are still joining, so we're going to provide more time so everyone can make their way into the meeting, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Morning, everyone. If you just jumped on, we're just waiting for more people to join, and we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it one more minute just to allow a few more people to join because we're still seeing quite a few people come on, and then we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Thank you. All right. Looks like we've stabilized as far as the number of folks coming on for the moment. As people come in, they can join. Wanted to just say thank you for everyone for joining this meeting today. This is our first public meeting for the traffic reduction study. We have a lot of information to cover, and we're really looking forward to hearing your questions and feedback. So before we get to the presentations, wanted to go through a little bit of some of the housekeeping rules. We are on Zoom for our meeting platform. You'll see a few people on video throughout. Those will be panelists from LA Metro, as well as the consultant team that's assisting. If the meeting will be recorded so that we can look at it afterwards, and we're identifying ways to potentially post the presentation that's online and the materials so that if you're not able to join for this whole thing, there will be resources as well to refer back to. If you would prefer to listen to it in Spanish, there is the ability to do so. You can select the interpretation icon on your toolbar, and you will be able to listen to it simulcast in Spanish. All right. After the presentation, we're going to have opportunities for question and answer. During the presentation, at some key moments, there will be some polls that will pop up. These are interactive polls. We just want to get to know you a little bit, get some of your feedback. It's intended to be a fun exercise and engage us all in the presentation materials. So, looking forward to your answers on those. In terms of the question and answer session, we're going to make a lot of time to get to everybody's questions after the presentation is over. However, during the presentation, if you have a question, go ahead and feel free to write it in the question and answer dialog box that you see on your screen. We'll go ahead and get to those afterwards. As well, we'll make some time for those who would like to call in or verbally put their questions out there as well at the end. So, hold on to those questions if you prefer to do that. In terms of how to connect with us, as I said, this is really just the first meeting, but we want to make sure that there's a variety of ways for you to reach out to us, connect with us, ask your questions, and provide your feedback. The two people listed here, myself, Ryan Wiggins, the Deputy Project Manager for the Traffic Reduction Study, and then Tam Nguyen, you'll see here on the screen as well. She's going to give the presentation. She's the Senior Director in our Office of Extraordinary Innovation and the Deputy, and actually the Project Manager for this study. Over the right side of the screen on the bottom side, you'll see some different ways you can connect with the project. You can go ahead and email us at trafficreduction@metro.net. If you'd like to provide lengthier comments or have a variety of questions, feel free to do that. And then there's a website as well, the metro.net/traffic reduction. On that, you'll find fuller descriptions of the projects. You'll find frequently asked questions and responses to those. You'll find the fact sheet for the project. There's also a short video that you can review that provides some more information on this project. So go ahead and connect with us via there as well. And then we also have Twitter and Facebook, which are resources. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joshua Schenk. He is our Chief Innovation Officer, LA Metro, and he's really going to give you some opening remarks before we get into the presentation on why we're pursuing this study, why it's important to look at it now. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Joshua. Go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. And thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about this project. This is really a chance for us to talk to you about what we're doing and for you to learn about the project and for us to understand your perspective and get your feedback. We are just starting to explore this idea, and we're doing it for a really critical reason, which is that even before the pandemic hit and for the several decades prior to that, we have had a major traffic problem in Los Angeles County, among the worst in the world. And we feel that we need to do something about it, that's the mission of Metro. That's what has been assigned to Metro. It's our responsibility to try to do something about the traffic problem. And we're exploring what some strategies could be. And we want to talk to you about those strategies today because we need to better understand your perspective on them. Just to put it in context, though, we have spent a lot of time in Los Angeles building more and more roadway space. We have built freeways and roadways that are pretty much unparalleled in their scope in this country and around the world. And yet, with all that building and all that freeway space, we still have among the worst congestion in the world. So we know that that strategy has not been effective to this point. And we also know that we want to expand our transit system, and it's important to expand our transit network, and we're doing that as quickly as possible. But that is very expensive, and it takes time. And even when that transit network is fully complete, which will take many, many years, it will not be able to absorb all of the tremendous demand for travel that is in this county. So we have to do something. We have to try other ideas. And that's what this is about. It's about floating those ideas, getting your feedback, and seeing if there are partners within this region who are willing to take a chance on an idea that has worked elsewhere, that is different than anything we've tried in Los Angeles, and that we believe has great potential. And that's the idea of whether we can price our roads. And traffic reduction is something that I think almost everyone wants in theory. The question is, do we really want to do it this way? Because there may not be any other option, and we may have to choose between continuing to live with with the traffic levels that we have, or that we had prior to the pandemic, or trying something new. And that's what we want to talk to you about. So this is the idea of a pilot program that would look at some kind of partnership within the region to try to reduce traffic in a different way. We recognize that this is very different and unusual, that is not something that Los Angeles has done before, and that it brings up issues about whether people will be able to afford their commutes. And that's a serious issue. And part of why we're doing this study is to figure out how to address that issue, because there are severe inequities in our transportation network right now. And the last thing we want to do is exacerbate those inequities. In fact, the goal of this study is to improve the equity of our transportation system. And we believe that there are opportunities to do that through pricing. And we want to talk to you about those today. So it's a very exciting project. We really need you to be a part of it. It just won't work unless you are a part of it. And that's why we're starting this process today and talking to you about this. So excited to hear what you have to say. Tam Nguyen is going to kick us off with a presentation about what this looks like. So Tam?
Thank you, Joshua. Good morning. My name is Tam Nguyen. I'm the Senior Director at Metro in this Innovation Office, and I'll actually share with you what the agenda looks like for today, which is that we are going to be providing a presentation and then have an overview of what the schedule for the study looks like, as well as the next steps. And then the rest of the time, starting around 12:15 or so, we'll open up for question and answers, and really look forward to hearing your feedback. Now, before we actually get started, I do want to introduce the rest of the project team who is going to be part of this presentation today, as well as behind the scenes, making sure that everything's running smoothly for this virtual meeting. This includes David Ungama, who is our project manager on the technical side. He's a consultant with WSP, a firm that has been working on congestion pricing and implementation of congestion pricing all across the world. Lisa Hummel will also be doing the polls, the interactive polling that Ryan mentioned, as well as Emma Huang and Kevin Alvarado, who's going to be behind the scenes working on the Q&A box to make sure that we are hearing your questions and can point us to the questions that to answer. And then Julia de Molina, who is going to be our interpreter, will also be joining us. And with that, actually, before we start on the presentation, we're actually going to go to our first poll to get to know you better. So I'm going to kick it off to Lisa to start the poll.
All right, thank you, Tam. So everyone should be seeing a pop-up dialog poll box. People are already responding, so I see we are in action here. The first question is just a getting to know you, kind of a warm-up. So which category best describes you? You can only select one of the options below, so you'll want to let us know which one best represents your unique perspective. We've got interested resident living in LA County, interested resident living outside LA County, representative of a community organization, employee or business owner, or a public official. And I'm thrilled to see that we have some responses in all of our categories. I'm going to give folks just a couple more moments to respond, and then I'll go ahead and share the results so we can all see who's with us today. Okay, we're at about 80%. I'm going to give about 5 more seconds, so if you haven't indicated, please do so now, and then I'll go ahead and end the poll and share results. Okay, coming at you here. So as you'll see, about 41% of the participants today are interested residents living within LA County. We welcome you and thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. Next up is public official, about 26 attendees. We appreciate your service and your time today. And then I'd say we got about a 3-way split with the other one. So thanks again. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. That should remove it from your screen, but if you need to X out of that box in the upper right-hand corner, please do so now. And then Tam, I'll let you go ahead and continue on with today's presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, it's great to see the wide perspective that we have in terms of attendees to this meeting here. So during today's presentation, we'll provide an overview of the traffic reduction study and walk you through the process and timeline. After the presentation, as I mentioned, we'll hear your questions and feedback. This study was previously named the Congestion Pricing Feasibility Study, but has since been renamed to focus on the outcome that we want to achieve, which is to reduce traffic congestion and to improve mobility. And a little bit of background and context for you. This study is an initiative of Metro's Vision 2028 strategic plan to study if, where, and how in LA County we could reduce traffic and improve mobility for all users using a 2-pronged approach of congestion pricing as a way to manage travel demand on our congested roadways and providing additional high quality options for folks. Next slide, please. So prior to the pandemic, this is a scene that we're all probably pretty familiar with in LA County on a daily basis. The LA region was experiencing economic and population growth that created tremendous travel demand on our existing, already very congested transportation network. And while traffic during COVID has declined substantially, historical data tells us that we should expect to see it rebound and likely become worse as we move beyond the pandemic and economic and population continue to grow. The traffic reduction study is about planning for the future. Through the end of the study in spring of 2022, we will be exploring if, where, and how in LA County this new approach of managing demand through congestion pricing and providing additional transportation options can reduce traffic, provide more high quality ways to get around. And if a pilot program is approved by the Metro Board in 2022, Metro and our partners would begin the anticipated multi-year process that would lead to an operational program. And by then, we anticipate that the pandemic would be behind us and traffic will be rebounding again as the economy recovers and as our population continues to increase. Next slide, please. Traffic has gotten consistently worse in our region over the years and decades, and all of our efforts to date, as Joshua mentioned, have not been able to keep up with the demand of our growing economy and our population. In this chart, you see how traffic congestion has kept increasing as population and economic activity have continued to grow. Even during major economic recessions, such as in 2007 to 2009, it's only slowed the increase in traffic and gridlock, while economic growth has accelerated it. If we were to extend this chart back several decades, we would see that same pattern. We haven't yet emerged from COVID, and we are already seeing a rebound in traffic in our regional freeway. By the end of summer, total travel on our freeway was only about 10% below that of summer of 2019. This trend is not unique to LA County at all. Other world-class regions and cities are seeing a similar trend. While there is a great deal of uncertainty around COVID, we can expect that traffic and its consequences are going to return and potentially worsen in the coming years. And continuing business as usual is only going to allow traffic congestion to keep getting worse, and the consequences will also get worse. And so this is where we need to explore new ways to get out of traffic. We all know the costs and consequences of traffic on an individual level. It steals our time and increases our stress and frustration. This is a picture of a person in a car in traffic, but it could just as easily be a person stuck in that same traffic on that same road, driving a delivery truck. Traffic hurts all of us and has serious consequences on our health, our finances, our productivity, and our future. But it hurts low-income and disadvantaged communities, individuals, and households even more. For those who have access and means to drive, most people do. For those who don't have access and means to drive, they're relegated to transportation options that don't always meet their needs. For example, if they take the bus is stuck in traffic. Even those who drive, they're stuck in traffic. So this study is an effort to explore how we can address the issue of traffic and these impacts through a new approach. Next slide, please. LA County is a unique and incredibly diverse place. Through the study, Metro will explore whether a traffic reduction pilot program with congestion pricing and additional transportation options would be feasible in LA County. Where and how could it work? And are there willing partners to explore this approach and explore a potential pilot program? If you're not familiar with the congestion pricing concept or how it works, you're not alone. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now, before we get to that, we do want to describe the framework that we'll be using to identify and evaluate a potential pilot program. The core goal of any pilot concept would be to reduce traffic and provide more high quality options for folks to get around. Coupled with these goals, we'll be prioritizing the additional positive outcomes in the areas including supporting improved health and safety, environmental and economic justice, economic vitality, and reinvesting net revenues in communities that are served or affected by a pilot. Communities throughout our region, they face different health, environmental, and economic challenges and realities. We need to understand what these challenges are, paying particular attention to vulnerable communities, households, businesses, and individuals, and then identify how a potential pilot could support positive outcomes. Any pilot program concept will focus first and foremost on achieving the goals and outcomes I mentioned. Nevertheless, we know that based on other programs around the world with similar objectives, we anticipate that there would be revenues generated that would be available for investment in communities that are served or affected by a pilot program. This would include those communities within the geographic boundaries, as well as those who travel to or through a pilot area as well. So before we get to the next presentation, which next part of the presentation, which I'm going to be handing over to David, we're going to pause here and do our second poll. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa.
Okay, thank you, Tam. So I'm going to be launching the poll. If you are joining via web browser only, you may not be able to participate. I do apologize for that. But if you are via the web or the desktop app and it's popped up on your screen, you should be seeing it now. These next questions are a traffic pulse. So these are your traffic pattern, habits, experience pre and post COVID. The first question is prior to COVID. How many hours a day on average did you spend stuck in traffic? This is stuck in traffic via bus, car, bicycle, or any other mode. Is it less than half an hour a day, half an hour to 1 hour a day, 1 to 2 hours a day, 2 to 3 hours per day, or more than 3 hours a day? How much time are you spending stuck in traffic? That's pre-COVID. So second question is now. So now during current times, how many hours a day would you say on average you are stuck in traffic? Same responses, less than half an hour to an hour, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, more than 3. Third question is, do you anticipate that LA County traffic will be getting better or worse in the future? Better, worse, not sure. And the final question is, this is again prior to COVID-19, were there places that you did not go because of traffic? Yes or no? All right, I appreciate everyone's activity who is able to participate here. We've got about 116 of our attendees. So I'm going to give you just maybe 5 more seconds to capture a few more responses. Okay. So I am sharing the results now. You should be able to see how all of our colleagues here on the line responded. Prior to COVID-19, I'd say about 30% of our participants were spending less than half an hour a day, but a close runner-up here with just under an hour or 1 to 2 hours a day. And looks like COVID has decreased the time we're spending in our cars, stuck in traffic, but we do anticipate it's going to get worse. So that's most likely why you're here to learn more this afternoon. And prior to COVID-19, there were definitely places that folks were not going because of traffic. 98% of our respondents said yes to that question. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing results. If you'd like to X out of that box, if it hasn't gone away for you, please do so. And then I'll be passing the presentation over to David Ungmeyer, who's going to kick things off here.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Just want to highlight for those who have been submitting questions, as a reminder, we will be we'll be providing answers to your questions at the conclusion of this presentation. So bear with us and keep them coming. They're definitely will be addressed in this presentation. Thank you for that. So why do we have traffic? The most simple answer is because there are more cars than space available. It's an issue of supply and demand. Next slide, please. Roads are designed to carry a certain number of vehicles if they are to function properly and move traffic along. The graphic in the next, but demand for roadway space is greater than the available supply, which creates an imbalance. And that's why we experience heavy traffic congestion at times when many people need and want to travel. So the graphic in the next slide shows the relationship between capacity of the roadway and speed. As soon as the roadway goes over capacity, such as it often does during the afternoon rush hour, the speeds dramatically slow. Each additional vehicle that enters the road after this point has an even greater impact, resulting in slower speeds and increasing gridlock. So, can't we just add more capacity or supply in the economic context? Roadway projects such as adding more lanes or increasing capacity of interchanges are generally expensive, take a long time to complete, and have not been able to keep up with rising demand, and finally can have a range of negative impacts. Over time, as our economy and our population have continued to grow, supply just hasn't been able to keep up with the demand for roadway space. We cannot build our way out of it. So if increasing the supply doesn't work, we need to look at managing demand. This can bring our roadway system back into balance to help traffic move again. The key in doing this is to keep the demand at a level that doesn't exceed the roadway capacity. So this right here, that's the same chart. But notice this time that speeds remain high as long as the demand stays below the full capacity of the roadway. When demand is highest, like during afternoon rush hour, and exceeds 100% of the capacity, that's when things start to get slow. This can make it easier for everyone to get around, regardless of how they choose to travel. In this illustration, we see a freeway where cars, trucks, buses, and shuttles are moving freely and efficiently. Managing demand has also been applied successfully in other regions to smooth traffic flow and improve the ability for people to drive, take transit, walk, bike, and roll safely, comfortably, and efficiently. So this is why the traffic reduction study will be looking at managing demand, and it is where pricing comes in. When used as part of a comprehensive strategy to reduce traffic, pricing can encourage just enough people to change the way that they travel some of the time to achieve the small shift in demand needed to get everyone moving again. This demand shift could include traveling at a different time, taking a different route, using a different mode such as carpooling, transit, or walking, biking, or rolling, or combining and reducing trips, telecommuting, or traveling to other destinations. Most people will not be able to make a change, so the price must be low enough to allow people to continue to afford driving, but high enough to encourage some people to change their travel behavior. Providing more high-quality travel options is also important to any traffic reduction program, so that more people have more reliable choices for getting around besides driving. There are examples of pricing used to manage demand all around us every day. Most of them, such as a charge for grocery bags at the store or skipping the line at an amusement park, have nowhere near the same importance as the roads we use to get to our jobs, schools, and doctor's appointments, and many other destinations that play a central role in our lives. Utilities such as electricity, water, and gas do play a comparable role in our society. For example, if we use too much electricity at once during periods of high demand, such as hot summer afternoons, the grid would be stressed. We would have to worry constantly about blackouts and whether we would have the power we need when we need it. Pricing is used here to avoid this outcome and effectively shift power usage to other parts of the day. This contrasts with our roads that are not priced, where on an almost daily basis, we are subjected to gridlock traffic that has so many negative impacts on us as individuals and our communities. Traffic reduction efforts that include congestion pricing and investments in additional transportation options have worked in other cities around the world, such as London, Stockholm, and Milan, resulting in measurable reductions in traffic congestion, emissions, and other positive outcomes. Some of these outcomes are highlighted here. In each of these examples, a range of transportation improvements was implemented months in advance of pricing to provide more high-quality transportation options. In addition, public support for these programs have been high after they've been implemented. So having these options is necessary for any program with pricing to work effectively. And it's at this point, we're going to turn to our third poll.
All right, thank you, David. So this poll is actually going to be a pop quiz. So you should be seeing it on your screen. We have one question this round. This is a pop quiz question. The response is actually backed by data. We would like to know if you know the answer to, if you were adding up all of the hours per year that the average Angelino is stuck in traffic, how many standard working days would that be? So 1 year, all the hours spent by an average Angelino in traffic, how many standard working days is that? We have a smart group today. I think we're getting a lot of correct responses here. Okay, I'm going to give about 5 more seconds to cast your vote and your answer to the pop quiz question. 5 working days, 7 working days, 12, or 14 working days. Okay, you should be seeing the results. And the correct answer is 14 working days. The average Angelino spends 2 full weeks per year stuck in traffic. So appreciate you participating. A+ on those responses, about 68 people with the right answer. Maybe they know that's how many days that they spend on average stuck in traffic. We're glad you joined us for the presentation, and I'm going to go ahead now and pass it back over to Tam.
Thank you, Lisa. So the traffic reduction study will explore providing a package of mobility improvements that would go along with the congestion pricing element. As in the example we just looked at, it's anticipated that it will be necessary to identify and implement better transportation options first, before the pricing element would be added. Some examples of the types of transportation improvements could include increased bus services, better walking and bicycling conditions, better incentives for carpooling, as well as increased telecommuting options. Now, these are just examples. There are likely other improvements that we could explore as we speak with communities and conduct the technical analysis. Next slide, please. Even with these improvements, there will be those who may still have to drive and be unable to change when they travel. While everyone will benefit from the reduction in traffic and time saved, not everyone may be able to shoulder that additional cost, even if the price is kept low. The study will explore how a pilot program could improve outcomes, especially for vulnerable communities. Here again, we can look to the example of electricity. Assistance programs such as discounts and rebates are available for low-income households to ensure electricity is for them, and that pricing to manage electricity demand doesn't fall on their shoulders. In addition to the additional transportation options, the study will explore how similar transportation strategies could be integrated into a pilot program. Next slide, please. To ensure a program would work for everyone and we're supporting vulnerable groups and communities, we must ensure equity is a core consideration at every step in this process, and that it's informed by stakeholder engagement and by data. To improve equity outcomes through a potential traffic reduction pilot program, we must move beyond just thinking about mitigating and minimizing negative impacts, but really thinking about improving outcomes and benefits for these populations. We'll seek to identify who is going to be impacted and how are they going to be impacted, establish best outcomes, and determine how to measure progress toward those outcomes. We want to measure potential benefits and burdens to different population groups and develop strategies to address those burdens and increase benefits, such as subsidies and reinvestment of net revenues. We'll develop proposed transportation improvements and then circulate and refine that pilot concept as we develop those. And so the question we're asking here is, could it work here? We recognize that LA County is unique and it requires a tailored approach. To this point, the study has had a countywide focus and an emphasis on education and listening. Since August, we've been engaging a broad range of stakeholders across the region in conversations about their ideas, their hopes, and concerns for a potential pilot. Over the next few months of the study, we'll be working to identify high-level concepts that will be explored further through analysis and public engagement. The concepts will consist of a location, pricing model, and partners that are interested in this new approach and a potential pilot program. One of the key questions we are trying to answer is where a traffic reduction pilot program could work in LA County. We must first understand where heavy traffic congestion has been most concentrated in the county. In this map, we see where in LA County traffic was the heaviest before COVID. The portion of the road network that are red in this map have a travel time index of 2.0. For example, a trip that would normally take 20 minutes in free flow traffic would have a travel time index of 1.0. If the same trip takes 40 minutes due to heavy traffic, it would have a travel time index of 2.0. Just because an area isn't shown in red does not mean it doesn't have bad traffic. This information is to inform conversations about the patterns of traffic in our region and how pricing models could be applied. Identifying, developing, and potentially implementing any potential pilot will require a strong partnership throughout the study and even beyond the study. And no concepts will be brought forward without partners who are interested and willing to explore this concept and a potential pilot with us. The pricing models we'll be exploring include corridor, cordon, and VMT pricing. We already have a version of corridor pricing in LA County. It's the Express Lanes program. Now we're taking this pricing model a step further to say, what if we priced all lanes within a corridor and combined it with better transportation options? Cordon pricing is creating a boundary around a central district and then charging vehicles to cross that boundary. This is the model used in London, Stockholm, and Milan. VMT pricing includes charging drivers based on vehicle miles traveled. And it could be for a small geographic location. And we're going to be using an array of these potential models or a hybrid system of this. As we apply these models to where the congestion is occurring within LA County and have those conversations. This is our schedule for the study. During this early listening and education phase of the traffic reduction study, we're working to identify some high-level initial concepts that will be further explored and developed over the coming months through technical analysis and public engagement. By summer of 2021, we anticipate bringing forward one recommended pilot concept for consideration by the Metro Board. This would be followed by the development of an implementation plan. And in spring 2022, the pilot concept and implementation plan would be brought to the Metro Board, and the board will determine whether to approve a pilot program to move forward. And as detailed at the beginning of this presentation, though, the approval of a traffic reduction pilot program would only be an intermediate step. Getting to an actual on-the-ground pilot program would still require federal and state approval, designing and deploying the system. And throughout that, and then also having the program up and running. And throughout that additional process, Metro and our partners would work together with a broader set of stakeholders to continue to refine the pilot and to ensure it responds to the traffic and mobility challenges as they evolve. So with that, we're going to do another poll in terms of staying in touch. So I'll hand it over to Lisa.
All right, thank you, Tam. So up until this point, all of the polls have been anonymous. So this poll is actually going to not be, so that we can tie it to your email that you registered if you would like us to. This is totally optional. You should be seeing the poll now. If you would like to stay informed on this study moving forward, you can indicate yes, and we will send project updates to your email that you used to register. You can also opt out. We're absolutely not going to use your email unless you would like us to do so, to keep you up to date on this project only. I'm going to give just a couple more moments. We've had about a little over half of our participants respond, so I'll give us about 10 more seconds so everyone can get a chance. We also had the stay in touch contact information on the slide. We'll also pull that up later in the presentation, so you can, of course, be in touch with us as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. I'm pleased to report that a lot of folks are very interested and would like to stay in touch, so we will make sure that we keep you in the know for future opportunities of outreach and any information that we have to share. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Ryan, who is going to facilitate our question and answer session. It is now time for that phase of the presentation.
Great. And of course, this is the part of the meeting that we actually look forward to the most, is when we get a chance to interact with you more directly. So just before we did that, I did want to note that we did have some technical difficulties with the Spanish translation. And we apologize for that. I do want to note that if you were interested in listening to this in Spanish, we're also having the materials that we do have a Spanish only meeting coming up this Saturday, as well as 2 more meetings in English where those will be translated well. So apologies for anyone who had that issue. Also, we are going to make these materials, so the presentation will be available online in both English and Spanish. It will have text narration to it, and we'll also explore ways to post this entire meeting online so that people can have a variety of ways to reach us. And then, of course, we are available to you via direct outreach. You can reach us through the project email. Our contact information was on the earlier slide, so you can do that as well. So please, we're completely open to you after this meeting. This is certainly only the first opportunity, but of many more that we want to continue to receive your feedback on. So with that, just wanted to lay back out the ways that you can interact with us and get your question answered. See, we already have a lot of written questions in the dialogue box, in the question and answer box. So thank you for submitting those. We're gonna go through those and take as much time as you need to get to all of your questions. Also do want to note that now is the time where if you would prefer to go ahead and ask a question verbally, you can feel free to raise your hand. And once you do that, we're going to start with some of the written questions, but I do want to make sure we're respecting everyone's time, and that we'll switch over to some of those hand raises momentarily. And then, of course, we know some of you have dialed in by phone. It looks like we have several people who've done that. If you are interested in verbalizing a question over the phone, you can press *9, and then we'll get a notification that you would like to talk, and we'll identify you by the last 3 digits of your phone number when it comes time to do that. So with that,
and Ryan, really quickly, if we can actually have Julia come onto the line really quickly to give the announcement you just made in Spanish before we jump into Q&A as well. So Julia, if you're able to jump on. Julia, you can unmute your mic now. This may go back to the actual problem we were having before. Apologies. Para todos que están en la línea, vamos a tener toda la información sobre esta junta en la página de web del proyecto. La página de web del proyecto está disponible en el link que puse en el chat function en el principio de esta junta. Vamos a ver en las próximas juntas que vamos a tener todos los problemas. Todo va a estar bien y vamos a poder hacer traducción activa durante la presentación, y el sábado vamos a tener una junta que solo va a estar en español, que va a pasar en mediodía. Gracias.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, so let's move on into the questions. I'm going to go ahead and verbalize your questions and repeat them so everyone can hear them. And then I'll pass them over to either Tam, who's our project director, Joshua Schenk, who spoke earlier, and he's the Chief Innovation Officer at Metro, or David Ungama, who is with WSP, who's handling much of the technical work for us. So with that, we'll get started. The first question we have in the question and answer box is from Jacob Wasserman. And it says, has the study considered officially seizing certain proposed traffic reduction measures? Specifically, as part of this effort, would Metro seize, as a matter of policy, freeway widening and freeway expansion going forward, as it is proven not to reduce traffic? So thank you, Jacob. And I'm going to pass that question over to Joshua Schenk to provide you an answer.
Hey, thanks for the question, Jacob. I think it's a really good one. The decision to cease funding highways or building highways would be a challenging one, given that based on Measure M and R votes, we are committed to many highway projects, and the voters voted for those in over 2/3 to pay taxes for those highway projects. That said, if our board of directors is inclined to make changes to Measure M, there are certain provisions under Measure M that allow those types of changes that we could potentially consider as part of this project. But that would be a pretty big deal to go back and against the will of the voters. Doesn't mean it couldn't be considered, and we can certainly look at that.
All right, thank you, Joshua. So again, just going to proceed down these lines of questions one at a time, and we'll get to all your questions eventually. So please appreciate your patience. This next one from an anonymous attendee says, there are many jobs that require a lot of travel across various corridors on their own mode of transportation, like gardening, that may be adversely affected by congestion pricing. How will you provide for folks like this who are also oftentimes low-income people of color? And how will you mitigate disproportionate impacts to low-income communities of color? This is a critical question. We recognize that this is one of the core questions in the traffic reduction study, and is something we want to pay a lot of attention to. As Tam stated, I'm going to toss it over here in just a second, that we actually want to improve outcomes through this, and we recognize that we must create a program that will work for everyone. So with that, I'm going to get it over to Tam to go ahead and kick us off, and then David or Joshua, if you have anything to add, just please let us know, and we'll give you a moment as well.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you for this question. These are important questions, and our study is actually, that's what our study is exploring and trying to answer, is how do we make sure that we are not just thinking about mitigating impacts, but improving outcomes for those who need to use our transportation system. And that's a great question. And as we develop the study further, we will be able to answer some of those questions that were raised. And right now we don't have a geographic location. So once we do have geographic locations, we can do analysis to see what are the travel profiles of users, of their travel patterns and so on, to be able to understand better who's going to be affected, how are they going to be affected, and how do we improve benefits for those who need to travel when they need to travel. With that, I also wanted to see if David and Joshua had anything else to add.
Thanks, Tam. Yeah, one additional thought I would have is we understand that the concept of congestion pricing certainly can be a bit scary at times, especially when considering the idea of a payment. But on the flip side, there's a lot of benefits that's also yielded from it, and especially in terms of travel time reliability and travel times themselves, being able to know when you're going to get someplace as opposed to the uncertainty of today with traffic. These are the types of questions that we will be looking at, but it's really difficult to just talk about the issue and impacts upon the community if we're just looking at data. I think it's really important to underscore that we're also talking with people throughout this process, talking with you, talking with your neighbors, talking with your colleagues and your friends and family, in forums such as this and others that we can do, in order to better understand the stories as to how these strategies could affect you and affect your friends and family. So as we get further along into this process, we really do encourage you to speak up, give us that information so that we can better talk with you about how we can best achieve the outcomes of the project, but at the same time mitigating and minimizing any potential problems as they may emerge.
Thanks, David. So it's moving on to the next question, also from an anonymous attendee, is remarking on how are you working with the Next Gen Bus Study, the Equity Platform, and the Fairless Transit Initiative to ensure that congestion pricing is supplemented by sufficient transportation options, especially for those who rely on transportation heavily. This is a great question, which really speaks to the importance of this being one effort amongst many to really deliver on Metro's strategic plan, Vision 2028, to really enable swift, easy transportation for everyone throughout LA County. So I think both Joshua and Tam have some comments on this. Joshua from the perspective of how this fits into Metro's overall vision, and then Tam can probably also add quite a bit about how specifically when this study we're coordinating with those other efforts.
Yeah, I mean, so what we're trying to do here is solve a massive problem, and you can't solve a massive problem with just one tool. And so we've got a number of strategies that have to move forward in coordination effectively in order to solve this problem. And when I say this problem, I mean the problem of traffic in Los Angeles County. So certainly how the bus network is being redesigned and how we're going to deploy buses in concert with this outcome of traffic reduction is critical to the success of the project and the success of what we're trying to achieve. And similarly, the Fairless System Initiative, how we price our system and whether we offer free rides is a question we'll have to consider as part of the traffic reduction study. Now, we don't know yet, as we've said, where it's going to be, but and we also don't know yet what the outcome of the Fairless System Initiative is going to be. But as those two things come into crystallize and we become clearer about them, we'll be able to figure out, okay, as part of traffic reduction, are we going to include Fairless in specific areas, or will that be something that is simply offered throughout the entire system? So coordination is our responsibility, and we're going to be making sure to do it going forward.
And then to add to what Joshua mentioned in terms of the coordination effort with NextGen, the equity platform, and other projects that are happening concurrently with this study, is that we are working with those teams to share information and data, building on the work that they've done. And with the equity platform, we have an equity officer who is looking at developing tools for us to use to incorporate equity into our business practices. And with that, we are working with her to look at how we can apply those tools in the study itself, in terms of assessing equity and making sure that we're getting better outcomes for vulnerable populations.
Great, thank you, Joshua and Tam. I want to note before we're going to answer one more of the written questions, and I do see one hand up in the participants box for someone who'd like to verbalize their question, and then we'll come back over to the written question. So before I'll read this next one, we'll answer that one, and then we'll move over to the hand raise for a response. So the next one is: congestion pricing can be a type of regressive tax. How will Metro address this issue through policies and programs in order to protect the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities? I think Tam got into this a little bit in the presentation about the toolbox of ways that we can help to address equity through this. But Tam, would you mind going ahead and going back to that? Because I know it was a lot of information during the presentation.
Yeah, sure, Ryan. This is one of the key considerations as we proceed forward, is how do we keep equity at the forefront of what we do and make sure that as we proceed with this, we're improving benefits for low-income households and disadvantaged communities. And so we have quite a few toolbox, and some that, as I mentioned in the presentation, that comes from the utilities company in terms of looking at assistance programs, low-income assistance programs, rebates, a number of different tools that we can see how can we use that to so that any sort of pricing program doesn't fall on the shoulders of those who are low income. And so that's something we're going to continue to explore, and as the study gets underway, we'll certainly be addressing those.
Great.
And I think Joshua may have some additional perspective on this as well, in terms of what he mentioned, where we are with equity right now in terms of our existing transportation system.
Yeah, thanks, Tam. I think that's right, because regressivity in taxation depends on a couple of factors, right? One is, how are you raising the money? And the other is, how are you spending the money? So I think we can't just look at how we're raising it. We have to also look at how we're spending it. So for example, you might have a regressive tax, such as a sales tax, which we do have, that is going to spend a lot of money on public transit, and that makes it much more equitable. Similarly, congestion pricing on the roadways, which by and large has been shown to be a lot less regressive than sales taxes, could be, if spent effectively to make sure that the lowest income people and the people who are most affected by congestion pricing are compensated, can actually become a progressive outcome. So yeah, you have to look at it from the whole entirety. And our goal is to look at how we can make this overall a positive thing for equity. And that's how we're going to approach the study.
Thank you, Joshua and Tam. So I want to go ahead and move over to a few of the raised hands just to make sure we're making space for everyone to provide their questions. Shahid Abbas, we're going to go ahead and unmute you in just a second. I'll let you know when it looks like you're unmuted, and then we can take your questions. Just give us 1 second to do that. Look, just one more moment.
Yep, so you should, yeah, here we go, got it.
Can you go?
Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate giving an opportunity. First of all, I must commend Metro taking this initiative of congestion pricing. This should have been done long time back as a part of our long range plan. You know, I really appreciate that. Just a couple of observations, really know, but I'm fully supportive of the study and of the program. And I know every time in this country, once we do a transportation, we draw nexus with Europe. That's very common. In congestion prices, in running our train, once I was in California and the Caltrain, they was doing it, their business plan for Caltrain, they draw their nexus with Europe. I think it's good, but I think the traffic patterns and distributions in Europe are very different and the requirements than what we have here. Overall trips in Europe are very short. I think people were, the transportation was fully developed 60, 70 years ago. And when they went to the congestion pricing, I think Cambridge was the first city to do the congestion pricing. And it worked very well because they had a system which could immediately take over the demand. So that very well. That being said, that's not the case in this country. Here, the best example we can have is the Washington, D.C., which have 475 and I-66. And they went over to HOV from 2 to 3 to the congestion pricing. And it was a design build project, which ended up losing $5 million almost every week. Because what happened, and also in Metro DC, Washington, DC, that's one of the finest metro system in the world. Neat and clean, train comes back after 3 minutes, 15 minutes, non-peak hours. So excellent system. So what happened, since the people were commuting long distance, economic pressures, they end up distributing the traffic onto surface streets. And it became a problem for us to manage traffic. Then I worked for the Arlington County there. And it worked a problem for us to manage those traffic on a surface street because they easily shifted. And we have a lot of safety issues. The whole character of the neighborhood, and especially Arlington County, was changed because of that congestion management. And we have to fight with VDOT very hard that they need to undo some of those things. So they go back and did some of those. So those are the things which we really need to keep in mind. And I think in LA area, the most of the congestion hub is, the heat map shows is the downtown and the surrounding area. That's the key. If we can make this moving, we can reduce a lot of congestions on our freeways. So those are three forward, into the study as you guys move through this.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Jade. I think it really speaks well, and I'll let Tam get into this a little bit more because I think it bears repeating. Is how the way we've oriented this study is really recognizing that LA is a very unique place and is both geographically, economically diverse, culturally diverse, and so we need to understand where it potentially could work and what those particular challenges could be. So all the things you mentioned, diversion, where it works best, those are all critical aspects. And so I think both probably David and Tam have some input to this. I'll let Tam get a little bit more into the process and why we've elected to move in this way, where we're beginning with a countywide look and then we're identifying places where it could potentially work and what it would look like. And then David, if you have anything to comment just on, the European example and how that does or does not translate over to the LA region, that would be helpful as well.
Thank you, Ryan. And Shri, thank you so much for your comment there, because that is something that we will be looking at in terms of how to customize a pilot program that works for the context of the LA region. And so as we identify and hone in on a geography, which we don't have yet, we'll get a better understanding of what the travel patterns are, where people are going, where are they coming from, and how to address cut-through traffic or the distribution of traffic to other streets that may have unintended consequences. Traffic diversion is a critical factor in a lot of programs around the world that have congestion pricing as a component of it. So that is certainly something that we will definitely need to look at in terms of how to make sure that there are not these unintended consequences of the pilot program. And with that, I'll also kick it off to David if he has anything he wanted to add.
Right. So beyond what Tam had just mentioned in terms of how we'll look at the different areas and different pilot applications within Los Angeles County, it is important to note that we are learning from the experiences from other communities around the world. There are certain examples in the United States, such as, Shri, you mentioned the I-66 corridor in the Washington, D.C. area. We have looked at that as something to learn from in terms of how congestion pricing could be potentially applied to the freeway systems. But when we think about it from the surface street system, perspective, we are looking primarily to the European and Asian context. And I think it's important to note that over time, we have seen increasing levels of vehicle travel in the European cities, even though we often think of them as a transit-rich environment. And that vehicle trip, they've been dealing with issues of congestion, much the same as LA has been dealing with issues of congestion. And they've used congestion pricing as a mechanism for providing for sustained travel time reliability and benefits, even in the most heavily saturated of areas and conditions from a traffic perspective. London's system is certainly very long-standing, having gone back over 15 years in terms of operation. Stockholm's as well. If you look at the networks within Stockholm, for example, there is a combination of both freeway systems as well as arterial systems that interact with the city. And that is part of what we're trying to understand for what's unique to the European context, but lessons that we can learn from their experiences and apply it to the unique elements that are present within the Los Angeles context as we move forward.
Thanks, David. So just noting where we are right now, I want to make sure that we want to get to everybody's questions, and we have a lot in the written down in the question and answer queue. We have 27 questions. We'll get to all of them. We also have 2 more hands raised. Just want to make sure and respect everybody's time to note that, know that we had a cutoff at this meeting at 1 o'clock, but we will make sure and answer these questions. Even if you're not on, we'll make sure that that you're able to access your answers through video afterwards and get that up. But for those people calling in, if you could just try to keep your questions under a minute so we can make sure we can get through everything, we'd just really appreciate that. So with that, let's go to Abigail Flores. Abigail, we're going ahead and unmute you, and I'll let you know when it looks like we've achieved that and you can ask your question. So just give us 1 second, please.
Miss Abigail, you should have a pop-up box that you'll have to accept the unmute.
There you go. It looks like
Great.
you are muted now.
Okay, hello. Pleasure to be with you today. Abigail Flores, resident of LA County. And I use the public transportation as well as carpooling and driving myself also. Appreciate Metro's transparency here. My question is, when selecting the pricing model for the pilot, I'm very concerned with the corridor pricing model because I feel that it could be hijacked and used to create a geofence or a boundary around affluent communities where commuters and those who need to gain access to these communities would be impacted negatively and restricted from entering these communities like Santa Monica or other affluent communities where people like to go to the beach. But if it costs $10 to enter Santa Monica, then people are going to head to other beaches. So I wanted to know, how is Metro going to prevent this project from being hijacked by those with a lot of resources to keep those with little resources out? Thank you.
Thanks, Abigail. That is a very important question. And it looks like Joshua has something to say. I will just say that, as we mentioned, we really want to use this project as an opportunity to improve equity outcomes. And that type of program would not be consistent with what we were talking about. But I'm sure Joshua has something to say on this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think something that we definitely are on guard against, right? Because that's, as Ryan said, that's not the objective here, and we want to make sure that that doesn't somehow become the objective of the study. So I really appreciate your making that point. One thing I would note is that if you have a cordon pricing structure around a specific area, I can understand how that could potentially be perceived or be used, or as you said, hijacked, to restrict access to that area. But if you design it appropriately, you can actually improve access to that area, because think about all of the times that you've tried to get somewhere that does not have pricing, and you spend half an hour to an hour waiting to get into that area, that is also a form of restriction of access. It is just that you are, instead of paying with your wallet, you're paying with your time. And so the question is, can we provide adequate alternatives to getting to an area that allow the pricing structure to work, so that people who choose to drive will be able to get there faster, and people who choose not to drive will also have a better opportunity to get to that area than they do currently. And that's how we would look at this concept.
Thank you, Joshua. We're going to go ahead and take the other hand that is raised from David Silvas, or David Silvas. Sorry, David, I don't know which pronunciation you prefer. So, but you're unmuted, so please feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Great, I appreciate it. Well, I'm Hungarian, so David is fine. In America, David's fine too. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to say that actually I'm the chair of the Planning and Land Use Committee for the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council. And this is a great information that you guys are kind of sharing with us today. My two sort of points that I want to make is, or a question, first of all, community voicing is very important. And do you guys have a plan to reach out to all of the neighborhood councils in advance to kind of share this information with them? Because in the past, we've encountered projects or proposals or studies through Metro where some communities were reached out to and others were not. We just want to make sure that we're covering all the bases to have community input for these projects. And secondly, I sort of have my own concerns and reservations over things like this, really with the experience of the freeway systems and the Metro fast track. I do know that, there's numerous occasions where I have been in the fast track lanes and have ended up with the same time that I would have spent on the actual freeway itself, or everyone else's commute time is then hijacked from a person in one lane that's going under the minimum required speed limit. And so our equity in time is just non-existent. So I hope that this is a very case by case, and that if this is going to be done, it's done in the right way. I know that we've had some issues with transit-oriented development and not a lot of sort of feedback from Metro on that with the community. So I really hope there's going to be community involvement moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So yeah, I mean, we really have valued process in this study and trying to do it in a groundbreaking, innovative way, which really means we really want to have conversations and effectively listen and get feedback throughout the process and have that inform the technical work as well. So I want to just go ahead and kick that over to Tam, who can detail a little bit more how we're going to move through the engagement process where we are right now. Especially right now, we're at a countywide level. We don't have geographic specificity, but we want to get there, obviously, and make sure that we're understanding and having those conversations throughout that process. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tam.
Thank you, Ryan. And David, thank you for that feedback, because as you mentioned, community involvement is really going to be key. And one of the things that we've done, I mentioned that we have been engaging with stakeholders discussions since August, and every time we go to these meetings, we ask, who else should we speak to? And so our list keeps on growing, which is great, because that means that we are reaching folks that otherwise we would not know or have not been reached yet. And so we welcome that feedback in terms of who else we need to reach and talk to as this study gets underway. As Ryan mentioned, this is right now a countywide effort. We don't have a geographic location yet. As we start to identify where the geographies could be, we will have a better sense of what the travel patterns and the profiles are, which communities are going to be affected, and be able to do more targeted engagement and reach out to those who would be affected, and working with community-based organizations to tap into their relationships with with those communities to better see how we can reach those who may not necessarily participate in these types of forums or meetings, but we want to figure out what are the ways to do so. And we always welcome that feedback in terms of how can we improve that. And we know that we can always learn from those who, like you, David, who are part of these communities and who have that local context and knowledge and can provide us with that feedback.
Go ahead, Tam.
I did also want to address David's other point about the Express Lanes program. I would actually also say that it goes back to like the worsening congestion that we are experiencing in LA County, where I would say that it's a demand issue as well in terms of our Express Lanes program right now, where we only have so many corridors. There's a lot of demand for driving. And so over time, it chips away at the improvements that we're able to make in terms of speed and reliability on our network. And so, you know, we hear you, and I think our Express Lanes program team is also working to look at how we can expand that system as well, so that the issues that you raised, David, are things that is a result of just so much congestion and growing congestion in our region.
Thanks, Tam. So I see Vivian, who also has her hand raised, has had multiple questions in the chat box or in the question and answer box. So I'm gonna go, Vivian, we're gonna unmute you in just a second, but first I'm gonna read through your questions that are in the question and answer, and maybe we can combine all of these into one answer, because it seems like you really have a lot of questions. We wanna make sure and answer them. So I'm gonna read them first, and Lisa, if you wouldn't mind getting ready to unmute Vivian, and we'll make sure we're addressing all of her questions as comprehensive as we can. So her first question, which was submitted at the very beginning of the meeting, was, do all of you ride your transit system as a daily commute, or do you drive your cars? Also C1 below that, regarding pricing, will you eliminate the rush hour fees on seniors and peoples with disabilities? So this kind of harkens back to how we will consider vulnerable populations and what types of tools we have to make sure that they benefit and aren't shouldered with burdens they can't take. And she also mentions about, why aren't we partnering with monorail companies, which are the future of transportation and cost effective? And in terms of this program, we really want to make sure that we're having those questions as we get down to the geographies, so that we can understand what community needs are. And I think that covers it as far as what she's written. But Vivian, did you have any additional questions, or did you just want to verbalize the ones I just repeated?
I'm very thankful for you in reading my questions. Again, I'm the president and CEO of Boyle Heights Community Partners. I also sit on the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council, the Plan and Land Use Committee, as well as the Historic Preservation Committee, which I chair. And, you know, we are very concerned about these TOCs and TODs rapidly coming in to change the face of our communities, and ignoring the needs of the community as well as the style of our communities, and literally forcing us to try to ride the public transportation system, which of course we feel does not meet the needs of the communities or city that you are trying to serve. Again, as you've done your research, there are many other states that have their rails 24/7, and also have rails that do go a lot further, and which is another concern of ours. But even more so is the monorail is even much more cost effective, more flexible, easier in every way you could possibly think. So I'm wondering why we continue, and I'm sorry, you're not about like losing your jobs, but at least transitioning over to monorail, and leaving the old school little rails and buses, and giving us more space, so that monorails have the ability to occupy open space that's not going to affect our sidewalks, our freeways, our streets. So, you know, wondering if you are in the near future going to consider that and save a bundle of money with not having to create the old school transit system that we currently have, and transition to monorails again, which can go further and are much more flexible. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Appreciate that. So there's a couple parts to that question. I want to allow Joshua to answer the really big picture questions about the, you know, overall types of transportation options we're considering. But then I want to make sure that Tam can really elaborate on how we're getting to identifying transportation options and investments through this study that would work for the communities that would be served or affected by this pilot program, by a potential pilot. So with that, Joshua, do you want to address the big picture here, and then Tam can talk to the study?
I do, but I also want to start off by saying that I don't have a commute anymore, as I imagine most people don't. But when I had a commute, it was on the Red Line every day. And I know that my staff, I don't think there's a single one of my staff in the Office of Extraordinary Innovation that drives a car to work. I think we all take transit. So, I think I appreciate that question, because I think it's important for us to be able to understand what it takes to make transit work. But that said, when it comes to the bigger picture of what types of rail or other vehicles we're going to use on our system, that is typically considered in the planning process. And I will admit and agree that there is tendency among people generally and among anyone to go with what they know, and people are more familiar with the technologies they know. They're going to be more inclined towards those. But that said, I encourage you to check out the procurement we recently did on the Sepulveda Transit Corridor, where we created a PDA structure that made it much more flexible as far as accepting proposals on other potential modes. And I think that could be a model for how Metro does this going forward, that could result in greater inclusiveness of projects that are not just limited to light rail and heavy rail as we've built so far, but include more bus rapid transit and potentially monorail as an option as well. So I encourage you to check that project out on the website.
And then
Good,
I'll add on to what Joshua says in terms of more project specific work. And since I am one of Joshua's staff, he already has indicated that most of us or all of us commute. When we did commute into the office, I took a combination of the bus and the train. And sometimes, you know, if I need to drive, I do. If my preference is for walking. And so, you know, I use all the different modes when it meets my my needs. And I think, you know, what you alluded to, Vivian, about providing people with options and making sure that, you know, in your communities, you have those options instead of being forced to use one or another. Is the crux of the study is to give people options for how they can get around. Whether you choose to drive, to walk, to bike, to take transit, you have high quality options to be able to do that in your community. And so that is what we're going to be exploring in terms of the transportation options as we look at where the geography for testing a pilot program could be. We haven't gotten there yet, but as the study unfolds, these will be iterative conversations with the community in terms of what works for them. And then I want to make sure I'm not missing anything in terms of other things. So seniors and people with disabilities, making sure that they're not affected. That's certainly part of the equity lens that we're applying to this study, and certainly something that we're going to be exploring further to make sure that we're improving outcomes and benefits for different population groups, especially the vulnerable populations in our region. Hopefully, Vivian, we've answered your questions. Sorry, it was a I was trying to jot it down as fast as I can.
Yeah, no, and Vivian, you know, as I said, please, if you feel like there's some gaps in our responses, please reach out to us. We're available to follow up and have more of a discussion with you. I will note that I am typically a Blue Line commuter, but on occasion I have ridden my bike from Long Beach to Union Station and LA. And, you know, in terms of transportation options, you know, there are, for example, lots of gaps in that in terms of it being accessible for everyone from the 8-year-old to the 80-year-old. And that is part of what we're trying to address in this study, is making sure that it works for everybody. So with that, we're going to head back over to the written questions. At the top of the list, I'm going to paraphrase this, and it's more of a comment than a question. But going to paraphrase it as best as I can. So, you know, this person is mentioning that they're a fan of public transportation and likes to see us invest in them and build them. But there's an issue with housing costs. Yeah, that is something that impacts many of us. And a lot of people can't afford to live in areas, and housing is built in places which which are the housing they can't afford is not necessarily accessible to the transit system, and even those near metro can sometimes be not affordable. And then of course there's the connectivity to those stations in terms of can you bike and walk and all of those things. So yes, these are all big issues. Some of those go way beyond the scope of this study. As Tam mentioned, as we would get down in this study towards the geographic areas, we would be looking at what those gaps are in the community and how this study could actually, and a potential pilot could actually begin to address those and make the transit system work better so that people aren't sitting on the bus in traffic, but also identifying ways that people could get to that transit better. And those people who continue to drive, which are going to be most people, are able to do so in a way where they are in an efficient system where it helps them access opportunity better. So with that, acknowledge the importance of that question and all those challenges, which is something we're trying to address much more broadly than just the study itself. But Tam, did you have anything to add?
I think, Ryan, you covered it really well. And I think it goes back to the fact that, there is no one solution that's going to address all of the challenges and issues we face. And so this is going to require collaboration across numerous things that we're trying to do, different strategies that are in place and different partnerships that are in place or need to be in place, both at Metro as well as with other agencies that are dealing with the other issues that is part of this comment.
Okay. Thank you, Tam. Next comment, which is from Richard Carrier, asking if ride sharing will be considered as part of the pilot. Go ahead, Tam, and then David, if you have any comments about other places where we've seen ride sharing being included in other efforts in cities, that would be helpful as well.
And Richard, by ride sharing, I'm assuming you mean ride hailing companies like Uber, Lyft type services that are on demand rather than carpooling, which, I think right now we are looking at all of the different, they're all on the table in terms of once we get to a geographic location, a concept, and looking at the package of mobility improvements, all of those are on the table in terms of what could work. And with that, I'll actually pass it over to David in terms of examples that he may have seen in other places.
Right. So I think it's important to recognize that the ride-hailing companies serve two different roles when it comes to the interaction with the transportation system. The first is as users of the roadway system, and so as a result, there's a question about are there going to be any additional charges that would be placed upon them, as has been done in Chicago, or is it more in terms of a facilitation role in the latter part, in respect to their function as it pertains to connecting people with, places, from one to another. It's, I think, an important role that they serve in terms of providing additional rides and providing additional transportation mobility options for individuals to get from one place to another, especially where there may be locations where the transit system isn't as robust. So to that end, the study will be looking at ride-hailing companies and their vehicles and their drivers in those two different contexts, but also not presuming that you necessarily just meant the ride-hailing, but also potentially the role of carpooling, which is the ride-sharing component of it. I think it is important to note that that is also a consideration in part of the policies and business rule designs that would eventually be discussed and evaluated as part of this process. I think the long story short is stay tuned as we get more information about what types of projects would be under consideration and the concepts under consideration. Then we can start talking about how those different impacts come to carpoolers, to ride-hail companies, and other types of modal users throughout the transportation system.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Tam. Next question. What other traffic reduction methods have you guys looked into other than congestion pricing? So not sure the exact context of this question, whether it was intended to mean what else have we actually tried up to this point, or what alternatives have we looked at for congestion pricing. But I think Joshua kind of got into this in his framing comments at the very beginning. So Joshua, if you could just go back to those again, and then we can see if there's anything to be added from Tam.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what I started with, and I know probably not everyone was here, but we've certainly, as a region and as a country, tried to eliminate traffic by building more and more roads, and that has proven not only unsuccessful but counterproductive. to being successful in the sense that it's increased traffic and has not alleviated the problem. We've certainly, as I've said, are trying to help by building mass transit alternatives to driving. And I think that will certainly make a difference in terms of providing an alternative, but it is very expensive and time consuming. And even if we were able to build everything that we want to build within the next 40 years, I can promise you there would still be traffic because people will continue to drive and to buy cars. There is just way too much demand for mass transit to even take enough of it to reduce traffic. So we've tried those. But the other thing is that we are looking at other ideas to reduce traffic, and we've experimented with some of them in Office of Extraordinary Innovation. And I hope you'll take a look at some of those ideas. We've developed, microtransit and mobility on demand, and we're developing a travel rewards program and numerous other things. But this is the one that's shown the most promise around the world and could be have the biggest impact. And that's why we're putting a lot of resources into this. That said, other ideas that could be as effective, that's why we're having these conversations, because we remain open to those even as we look at this.
Thanks, Joshua. So just wanted to note that obviously we're about the original time for this meeting and understand that people are taking valuable parts of their day out to join us. And just wanted to reiterate that if you asked a question and you have to drop off, that's okay, because we're going to go ahead and answer it, and then we'll make sure that this is available, that the answers are available afterwards, so that you can make sure and come back to them. So appreciate your time if you have to drop off, and if you can stay on, that's great. We appreciate your ongoing attention. So the next question is from Marcial Lopez. It says, "Hi there. I was wondering, why is this even up on the docket? Congestion pricing is a regressive system that will adversely affect people of color. Noting that working people drive in LA, and this is an affront to their livelihoods, that we don't have a comprehensive mass transit system in Los Angeles, and in light of the displacement we've seen throughout the city, we have more marginalized people than ever that have been forced to relocate to far-flung suburbs and exurbs, and those people will be hurt by congestion pricing. Why is this being treated as a solution when it solely prices poor people out of driving?" This is a very important question. We've talked about, we do not want a program that would result in these types of outcomes. We recognize that there's existing inequities in the system, and it doesn't work for a lot of people, especially communities, low-income communities, households, and individuals. And that what we're really seeking to do here is support improved outcomes, access to opportunity, healthier communities, more transportation options, and of course, the core goal is less time stuck in traffic, regardless of the mode in which you travel. And so I'm going to kick it over to Tam first, because to talk about the process of what we're trying to do from the very beginning of this study in terms of identifying vulnerable communities, how we're going to seek to integrate the consideration of those potential impacts into the study, into the analysis, and engage with and make sure that we're communicating those potential impacts, and then looking into that toolbox of options we have to go ahead and make sure that this doesn't become a regressive program if it in fact is implemented. So with that, Tam, I'll kick it over to you.
Actually, Ryan, you characterized it and summarized it really well. And so I think the only thing that I actually wanted to make sure that we add is that what you have laid out in terms of the scenario is what we don't want in a program like this. And there are ways to design it, and we want to explore how we can design it to improve outcomes, give people more options. And the process itself is a way to make sure that we are including and reaching out intentionally to those who may be affected, to those may have not participated in these types of decision-making process in the past, and really be inclusive in the process. And we welcome any feedback in terms of how we can continue to do that, because voices of these communities are really important as we design this program.
Thanks, Tam. So Marcial, thank you for that question. We both said we share those concerns as individuals on this project team and as an agency, and we want to make sure that we don't have that outcome. So please, feel free to keep on communicating with us, because those are really critical considerations, and we want to keep on hearing from you. So the next question says, "I'm a senior and no longer commute. I support expansion of public transit, acknowledging there are many problems with it, and that LA is not designed for mass transit due to how spread out it is. And it's very hard to be comprehensive with that transit. And that right now we should be beginning with and prioritizing options such as flex hours and telecommuting, dedicated bus and carpool lanes, stating that congestion pricing is inherently a burden on those least able to afford it. And then like COVID being a bigger burden on low income and communities of color because they don't have the option to work from home. And that we've already paid for our roadways and their maintenance through our taxes. And then finally, also, who are these partners and what would they do? Are they consultants and middlemen who skim off profit without contributing to a solution? So there's a lot of different points in this comment and question. I think first, there's the options in terms of the flex hours, telecommuting, dedicated bus and carpool lanes, et cetera. We've mentioned this before, so I'll go ahead and respond to this first. And then I think let's get to the core concerns that are being addressed here is that we, in terms of designing a potential pilot, we'll be working with our partners to identify what's needed. And that will include connecting with communities where they are, and all those things are on the table. Telecommuting, flex hours for those who can. And as this comment notes, a lot of folks can't telecommute. They may not be able to have flex hours. And the comment on it being COVID, being that type of burden on essential workers that still have to use transit if they don't have a car and they're still driving, absolutely. We need to make sure the program works for everyone, whether or not they have the privilege and the ability to telecommute or those who cannot. So just wanted to make that clear that is absolutely a core essential part of this study. And feel free, Joshua and Tam, to go back to this, but I just wanted to get that out there right now. There is this discussion of whether we've already paid for our roadways and their maintenance through our taxes, which I think we should go ahead and distinguish between what we're talking about here and gas taxes. And then also there is this question about what are partners. So I think this bears a little bit of coming back to in terms of who are the partners and what would they do. So Joshua, if you have anything to add to the equity component, please do so. If we could talk about and distinguish a little bit between what our gas taxes are and what a potential pricing fee. And David, I think you might have something to add on this as well. Would you mind doing so?
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And when it comes to the equity issue, I think we have to have open eyes about the current inequities that we are facing. I think that it is an affront to working people that our buses have to sit in the same traffic as all the other cars. Why is that fair? Our buses are filled with people who are not driving or not polluting, and should have priority. So that's an example of an inequity in the current system. With pricing, those buses would move faster, and those people would not pay any more than they do today. So that's a major equity improvement that can result from pricing. And that's why how we design this is so critical. You have to think about everybody when we think about equity, not just one select group. So that's on the equity issue. Now on the taxes, I want to distinguish between things that are paying for our infrastructure and then a usage of the infrastructure, because I think that's the distinction that we're talking about here, right? So we do pay for the maintenance and upkeep of the roads typically through gas taxes, both federal and state. That is not the same as how we use that capacity. And right now, the way we use that capacity is that anyone can use it for free at any time, and that results in tremendous traffic congestion. We're not proposing to raise more money to maintain the roads. We are proposing to have pricing as a way of moderating the use of the roads so that we could potentially have more people go through and use those roads effectively faster than we did previously. That's very different than how we fund the infrastructure itself, which is typically accomplished through gasoline tax.
Thanks, Joshua. Tam, could you talk a little bit about what these partners are that we're talking about and what their roles would be? And then David, I'm going to hand it back off to you at the end after that, just so if you have anything to add to either point.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. In terms of partners, Metro does not own a lot of the transportation system. We do not have control over a lot of the roadway system. And so partners will mean, in this case, several layers of partners, right? One of them is those, we need to find those who are willing to explore this further with us, who control the roadway network, and work on designing with them what a potential pilot program could look like. But at another level is making sure that there is buy-in from the communities and from those who are going to be using that roadway. And so there are going to be many layers in terms of getting the support to even move forward with a pilot program. And this is where this is about getting buy-in and working with communities and the public in terms of what could work to address this issue that we mentioned from the very beginning, which is worsening congestion that affects us in so many ways. And then
Great.
I'll pass it on to David if he has anything else to add.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, nothing substantial. The one thing that I would add in that's important to realize, however, is that the context of congestion pricing can't be implemented by Metro alone. Not only is it in partnership with the, with potential municipalities, but it's also in partnership with the state and the federal government as well. And at all levels, there are some comments that need and concerns and issues that would all need to be examined and addressed prior to any implementation of this concept within Los Angeles.
Thank you. Next question from David DeCosin. Why is the traffic growth so disconnected with population growth? David, I think you're referring to maybe the slides we had early on and the one that specifically showed the gradually increasing population versus the economic growth, which was most closely correlated with traffic, the increase in traffic. I mean, there's a lot of reasons today. So David, I'm sure, has a number of opinions on this as well. A couple of things I would note is that, our region is not just, our economy is much more dynamic than just the amount of people that are in it. We're a major goods movement corridor. 40% of all the goods that come in and out of our country go through it. So that is not necessarily tied just to population. It also gets to that concept of, it's those last few cars as they get on the road that are creating traffic. You just have to go a little bit above capacity to dramatically decrease speeds. So there's a variety of factors going into it, and population is certainly an important component of it, but is not the only component. And so, David, did you have anything to add based on, your encyclopedic knowledge of how all of this works?
Right. So, Ryan, you hit on a lot of the dynamics about traffic, and it's important to realize that it's not linear. So, one additional person does not necessarily mean a series of additional trips for that individual. There's an interesting element when you start looking at the statistics for the Los Angeles region as a whole. And to me, the most fascinating one of it is that the amount of miles we drive per year on average has gone down in the county. Yet the amount of hours that we spend in traffic congestion has gone up per capita substantially as a county. And so what that means is we're driving less, but we're driving in much more heavily congested conditions. And so we're not going as far, and it's taking us even longer to get there. Those are not factors of not just population growth, but it's also about all the other factors relating to where we're traveling, how we're traveling, and what type of users of the system that we are that are interacting in order to create that traffic. It's kind of relates back to the previous comments as well about where is the generation of traffic. And really, it's the reflection in the use that once you get to your full capacity utilization, up to that 100%, every additional person trying to access the road at that time creates a compounding effect upon all the other users and travelers in that corridor. And that's part of that explanation as to how it can be that we're driving less per mile on average, but we're experiencing greater congestion on average per person.
Thank you. Go to the next question from Eric Howie. Why was the name of this project changed from the congestion pricing study name to the traffic reduction study when it appears the main purpose of the study is to study the effects of congestion pricing? And was it to mitigate criticism of the study? So Tam, I'll pass this over to you because this is something we talk a lot with everyone we talk to about this study.
Thank you, Ryan. And Eric, in terms of the name of the study, we wanted to make sure that we're really focusing on the outcome that we want to achieve, which is to reduce traffic congestion, to improve mobility. And we recognize that there's a lot of things to unpack with the name. There's not going to be a perfect name for the study, as we've had a lot of conversations, even externally, about what's the best way to name this study. But ultimately, what we, I think, want to focus on is the content of this study, what we're trying to achieve, and what are the outcomes that we are trying to achieve with that. And that's why the name change was to really reflect that outcome that we want to achieve overall.
Great, Tim. Next one coming your way as well. How will the board determine whether to go forward with congestion pricing, and how will the board determine which location to pilot the program?
So this is an ongoing, this is a study where we're going to have a lot of check-in points with the Metro board so that they can make informed decisions throughout this process. There are some key milestones in which we'll be going to the board, one of them being next year, where we'll be going to them with a preferred pilot concept of where it could be. And then in 2022, going to the Metro board with an implementation plan. And it's going to be based on the facts and data that we have provided, as well as feedback from our external stakeholder engagement process and feedback from the public. So all of that will be what we share with the Metro board, and so that they can make an informed decision. And Joshua, is there anything you wanted to add?
Okay, thank you, Tam. So another question here is what metrics will be used to determine the success of the pilot program, and will there be equity-focused metrics? For the latter, yes, there will be equity-focused metrics, and there will be metrics overall for determining the performance of the program. There is a process to get there, and I'll let Tam kind of jump into this, but basically, it is an iterative process, and David has some add to do in the technical aspect of the study, but basically, yes, the answer to all of those is there will be performance metrics and there will be equity-focused metrics. So Tam, do you want to just talk a little bit about like the conversations we're having earlier to help inform the identification of those metrics? And then David, if you can just jump in a little bit and talk about how that will feed into the technical process, like that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Ryan. So as we work with different stakeholders and community-based organizations, we're really trying to understand what does success look like? How do we measure success? What are the indicators we should look at to be able to determine that? And so we are holding equity-focused conversations, and throughout the study, we will be using the information from that to feed into our. And I to go back to some of the things that we mentioned in the slide itself, in terms of when we talk, for example, about outcomes such as economic vitality. What does it mean? So that's where, or environmental and economic justice. What does that mean? What does success look like when we talk about outcomes that include improved health and safety? What does that mean? And so those are areas where we're also going to be looking at, well, what are the measures of success and how are we going to measure that? And those are going to be conversations we're going to have with folks as the study gets underway. With that, I'll also pass it on to David if he has anything else to add.
Right, and so in addition to the equity-related performance metrics that we would use as part of the process of evaluating a pilot concept and to bring it to the board for approval to move forward, there's also a series of performance metrics that would be put in place in the deployment phase in order to understand, once you open up and initiate the pilot, is it being effective towards meeting those objectives? And so it's a very concerted effort in terms of evaluation and constant monitoring in order to ensure that the concept is actually tying itself back to those goals and objectives from an equity perspective, as well as all the other types of impacts that we're looking for in terms of an improvement to traffic and an improvement to multimodal mobility options, to all the other things that we are looking for this pilot to achieve. It's important to recognize that it's evaluated both in this stage for the decision to deploy, but then also after deployment to ensure it actually made good on its promise.
Great, thank you. So, recognizing we still have 17 questions open and trying to cross-tabulate that with who's still on the call so we can make sure and try to answer your questions while you're on. wanted to skip down to a question from Francis Appia. Hopefully I'm not butchering your name. His question, or Francis's question, is a study linked to climate change and innovation. And this, I think, also gets back to the performance metrics and what are the goals of the project. We talked about traffic reduction and also improved mobility options being the core goals, but all of those additional positive outcomes that Tam had mentioned, environmental and economic justice, public health, economic vitality, those things, we want to measure, we want to establish desired outcomes for those and go ahead and measure and design a program to get there. So with that, there is potentially a good impacts on reductions in greenhouse gases as part of a traffic reduction program. I'll let David talk a little bit about some other places where we've seen some beneficial climate change impacts. And then more broadly, we can talk about the concept of innovation. We feel like this is innovative potentially of how we set it up, but there may be some additional thoughts on that as well. So David, I'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, one of the key elements that really plays out in terms of the implementation of congestion pricing elsewhere around the world has been emissions reductions. It is a key component of European plans to achieve climate and emissions goals within Europe, and certainly, in addition to the countries that have already deployed congestion pricing, there have been other efforts within the Netherlands, within France, and an expansion of it within Italy in order to really understand what can be done with congestion pricing as part of a comprehensive platform for emission reduction and carbon reduction. The results to date have been quite encouraging. So we've seen within those communities somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 30% reduction in vehicle emissions. And a large part of that is because we are no longer seeing a lot, vehicles stacking up, not moving, but still contributing carbon emissions to the atmosphere as part of their saturated conditions. The metaphor that I like to think about in terms of how the congestion pricing interacts is that sense of balance, right? Part of the strategy behind congestion pricing is to provide balance back to the supply and demand allocation within our roadway system. And whenever you're on a balance board, for example, and you start to get out of balance, you start to flail about quite a bit, trying to get yourself back into balance. It's that calmness and serenity that you get while in balance that allows for energy to be conserved and you're not flailing about. It's much the same way when we start looking at pricing. When we try to allocate and bring balance back to our supply and demand, it also has a beneficial consequential impact on our emissions and for the climate on whole.
Thanks, David. I feel like in terms of the innovation question, we've gotten into that in a variety of ways. Like we want to support innovation. Obviously, innovation can be interpreted in a variety of ways, but for us, really, innovation is addressing a problem in a way that really has a great outcome for people. But Joshua, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I got kicked off and I just joined when you were asking me a question, so I don't know what the question is.
It's okay. It was just at the tail end of that last question, there was will innovation be considered as part of this? And I had just remarked that, I think we generally look at innovation as addressing a problem in a way that produces a good outcome for folks, in a way oftentimes that hasn't been attempted before or applied before, and that's kind of how we're thinking about innovation. But are there any additional comments you'd like to add to how we'd consider innovation as part of this?
Well, I think this is innovation, right? I mean, this is the innovation often means trying things that you haven't tried before to solve challenging problems, and that's what we're doing. We're putting it out there that perhaps we need to try something different to solve this enormous challenge because we haven't been successful with the other things we tried. So that's the definition of innovation in my mind.
Great. Next question. I see Ian Conway is still on, so I want to make sure and get to that question as well. Are you going to study land use effects as this potentially could result in big changes to DTLA? David, could you just dive into a high-level summary of how modeling will be used in this project and what will be the inputs into it?
Sure, certainly. First thing I want to clear up is that the question, it indicated downtown Los Angeles, and we have not identified locations yet for where congestion pricing could be applied. So just want to make sure that that's clear, that there is no we don't know where within the county yet that this pilot would take place. But secondly, in terms of the question about land use, so as part of the evaluation process of the possibility and the feasibility assessment, it utilizes an advanced computer model that's operated by the region, what's called the Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Southern California Association of Governments. And they maintain this very complex, comprehensive computer model that simulates traffic throughout all of not only Los Angeles County, but its neighbors in San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, Ventura, et cetera. And when you start looking at how this all interacts, it utilizes estimates and forecasts of what land use will be like over time. So we're looking at it from the context of a pilot project, and that pilot context itself is not a very large, grandiose concept. It is certainly one that helps identify what is the possibility and what is the effectiveness and creates a context for evaluation. So in that feasibility assessment, we will be looking at what the potential economic impacts would be, what the potential would be for business, operations, what does it mean for traffic patterns, what does it mean for mobility, in addition to a variety of socioeconomic sort of analysis in terms of equity and in terms of demographic interaction with the system. The part it doesn't really address is a more longer term effect upon transportation. That's just a little bit outside the context of the pilot. I agree with your comment that, if congestion pricing was pursued in a very large comprehensive context, we would anticipate to see some effect upon land use, but we would also anticipate seeing some long-term effect upon other components that really inform the transportation system too. As it is, that really is outside of what we're going to be looking at in the pilot, but it's certainly one that we're going to be cognizant of.
Thanks, David. Next question, Devin, looks like you're still on, as well as for Devin Thorne, or Devon, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. If any, what are your considerations in bicycling infrastructure and support as an auxiliary benefit to traffic congestion? Not 100% sure exactly what you're getting at here, but I think we do see connectivity, biking, walking as a key consideration in this study and how it would provide high quality mobility options. And so there's potentially ways to consider this upfront in the study in terms of how could pricing actually support those on the front end, and what types of potential investments might be warranted on the back end. So Tam, do you have anything to add on that?
Ryan, I think you summarized it well. Part of what we are going to be making sure is part of the pricing component is that package of mobility improvements. And as we laid out in one of the slides in terms of examples, would be bicycle improvements to bicycle facilities or to walking conditions, to make sure that it works for folks in terms of giving folks more options. So we'll bring that further in terms of that, but on a separate level, an effort altogether that's related is what Metro is trying to do in terms of facilitating improvement of the bicycle network and our active transportation network, and that is something that is happening with our other efforts as well, through first last mile work, through our funding of walking and bicycling facilities. And so there's a lot of things that we're trying to get at here, which is that there's no one solution, but that it's all different strategies trying to work together to make sure that we give people more options, more and better options.
Thank you, Tam. Next question, looks like Thomas Yelenich is still online, and this one is, how would freight be handled? Goods movement is responsible for 1 in 3 jobs in California. Additional transportation costs for goods movement would end up being a tax that discourages the source of a large number of jobs and harm the competitiveness of the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, which have lost about 20% market share since 2006. So in terms of the process of the study, goods movement will be an important consideration. Without the geographic specificity of what potential concepts would be right now, we don't know, for example, would it be a goods movement corridor, a major thoroughfare? Would there be facilities such as warehousing, distribution centers, those which would be inside of it? We don't know those types of things yet, but as we get down to where a potential concept could be, we'll have to really understand how goods movement would be interrelated with that. So that it will be a core consideration regardless. In terms of whether it would be a tax that discourages the source of a large number of jobs, we should also consider that our existing congestion is actually a pretty serious cost on our goods movement ability to achieve the turns that we need to ensure reliable movement out of the metropolitan area, and especially to get that multimodal or cargo out east, long haul trucking, all of these things. So yes, it's absolutely a critical component. We'll have to consider it. We should consider it. And we will look for ways to ensure that it actually enhances competitiveness of the goods movement sector and not actually penalizes it. So with that, Tam, do you have anything to add? Or David, anything in other cases where you've seen where goods movement has been impacted and how it might have benefited or been burdened from design, whether good or bad?
I think you covered it pretty well, Ryan. I don't have anything. David, I'll see if David has any additional thoughts.
I think the main message is the one that that Joshua had made just a few moments ago, which was that when we start thinking about traffic congestion on our freeway systems and on our surface street systems as well, this is an impact to all users of that system. And so every truck that gets stuck within traffic is also a delay to the goods getting to market. It's certainly when we think about the movement in and out of the port of LA and Port of Long Beach, there is substantial amounts of congestion that affects the ability to get freight movement in and out of that area. When we think about it in the pilot context, again, part of the understanding of the pilot program is to recognize what can be beneficial to travelers. And so when we go through the evaluation of different pilot concepts, freight movement is one of those components within the modeling aspects, as well as other types of impact analyses that will be done. So we'll have a better understanding as to what the potential impacts would be to freight movement, and then additional levels of dialogue in order to get more of an anecdotal perspective on how congestion pricing could or could not be of benefit to the freight community.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to we're going to read Hillary Norton's question, and then I know Farmers, we see your hand raised, so we'll get to you right after this next question. So just hold tight for a minute. Hillary Norton's question: how will the traffic reduction fee interact with the express lanes tolling? Will there be something similar to the express lanes, such as net toll revenue policy, or a specific amount of funds set aside annually for local competitive grant projects? So Tam, I'll kick it over to you to discuss, first, how it would interact with express lanes, and second, how we would consider any additional revenues and what types of uses those could go to.
Thank you, Ryan. And Hillary, thank you for that question. So some of them in terms of the first part, I'll take the first part regarding how it interacts with the express lanes, is that we want to make sure that it's seamless from the user perspective. So as we design a pilot program, depending where it's located and whether it intersects with our express lanes network, is that we'll have to make sure that it's seamless, and that's something that's always going to be we're going to be considering as we design the system. The other piece in terms of how the revenues are going to be some sort of net toll revenues policy or program. At this point, we don't know yet in terms of how much revenue is going to be generated, because we don't actually have a geographic location or a concept yet. But as we get into more of that information, and we can get a better idea of the revenues that are generated, that is a conversation we're going to have with those who are going to be affected by a pilot program to see how do we use revenues that are and make sure that it's achieving the outcomes that we had stated earlier.
Thanks, Tam. So Lisa, if you wouldn't mind unmuting Farmars. All right, Farmars, you should be able to talk now.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, can.
Great. I understand that the traffic reduction study has not yet considered specific locations. So my question is going to be in the context of the types of considerations that you'll have. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about the possibility of implementing the pilot traffic reduction project around a place like LAX Airport, where some of the considerations might be the size of the impact on existing gridlock, on air quality, on environmental justice in terms of the air quality impacts, in terms of ease of implementation because of having one jurisdiction and potentially one property owner. In terms of equity, if most of the people are being impacted are middle class and upper class drivers, and where there is a robust transit alternative in the form of the LAX People Mover and LAX shuttle buses. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Again, I understand you haven't looked at specific locations yet, but I'd like to hear if these are the types of, some of the types of considerations that you're looking at in terms of selecting a location for the pilot project.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And in short, I think everything you outlined there in terms of the types of considerations would be the things we'd be looking at and things we've discussed internally so far. But Tam, David, do you have anything to add? I would say yes. I think a general response is everything you identified are the types of considerations we're looking at.
And I would add, in terms of where the geographic location is, this is where looking and discussing with potential interested partners is going to be really key, because we can do all the technical analysis we want in terms of where ideally, technically, feasibly, where it could occur. But if there's no willing partner, and if the willing partner being the one who controls that street network, we're not going to be able to get very far. And so we are, we want to first make sure that we're doing congestion pricing or considering congestion pricing where there is congestion, and then also looking at what is an applicable model, pricing model that could work, as well as identifying who are the potential interested partners and co-creating, co-developing with them where potential concepts could be. Anything you wanted to add, David?
The only element that I'd add to it is that in the context of any location, we are learning from the successful applications of congestion pricing in Europe and Asia. And what we have seen in those is it's most successful when there is a definable geographic area that is well understood by people, so that when you describe the area, they know exactly where you're talking about. Secondly, that there's a focus on commercial activity that tends to have an effect upon the ability for congestion pricing to reduce travel during peak periods. And then finally, a level of understanding and acceptance by those who are within that immediate community as to why the congestion pricing project could be of benefit to them and be something that would be desirable. And so for any place within LA County, those are some of the key elements that we're looking towards. And certainly, as you point out, LAX has some of those elements as well. But there are also other locations throughout the county that also provide for those same considerations. And as a result, we are casting a pretty wide net at the moment in terms of understanding where there could be potential pilot locations.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to skip down to Robert Wong's question because he's still online. I want to make sure that we get an answer for him while he is on. So Robert asks, would the plan be targeting certain corridors first, like the next gen, like identify the next gen plan? So Tam, you want to provide an answer for that one?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Would the plan be targeting certain corridors first, like in the next gen plan?
I think I might need a little bit more context in terms of this, but I think what we can say is in terms of targeting a particular corridor is we are trying to get to a particular corridor so that we can, that is something that we are looking at in terms of where we could try this out and whether it works. And so identifying a particular corridor or geographic location where there is a lot of traffic and there has not necessarily been tools that have worked is going to be a key consideration. And then, of course, working with our potential partners to explore that further is going to be a key consideration.
Thank you, Tam. So the rest of these, it looks like, are anonymous or have not, or have already left the meeting. So we're just going to answer these in order. The first one, has telecommuting been considered as a method to reduce traffic? And then adds MTC in Northern California has been looking into requesting and mandating large firms and large buildings to telecommute a couple times a week. Has LA Metro been looking into this as a long-term solution? So Tam, I think this is a dual part question about the agency as a whole and also within the study.
So the short answer is yes, we are exploring this both as part of the study in terms of what we can do to even address the trip not taken. If there are other ways where people can do what they need to do without even having to be on the roadway, that is certainly something that we would be exploring through this. And then on a larger scale, Metro is exploring telecommuting and how we can leverage telecommuting in terms of a solution. And so we have received a federal grant recently to look at exploring that further. And as that becomes more, as we get more details, glad to share that as well. But we are certainly looking at telecommuting as an opportunity here.
Great. Next question regarding how to spend the money. How are you going to explain to toll payers that they'll also benefit from new taxes? Is this a penalty for driving, or are drivers going to see some benefit, and what assurances will driver have that they'll benefit from this plan? So Tam, I think part of this is just how we're going to be, whether or not this is a penalty for driving, like what are the benefits, and also in terms of performance for this program, how we'll make sure and be transparent about the benefits drivers would have, and how we'll make sure we're holding ourselves to strong performance with a potential pilot.
Well, I would say that right now, when as we mentioned, traffic continues to get worse, a lot of people are spending both money as well as their time stuck in traffic. The unpredictability of traffic also has ramifications for how much you have to plan for your trip. All of these are penalties that drivers are paying right now. And so if that's the case, what we're looking at is how do we use congestion pricing as a mechanism to improve and make it easier so that however you choose to travel, you have a better experience, whether you're driving, you're taking the bus, it's not stuck in traffic. And so ultimately that is our goal, is to look at how can we improve those benefits and reduce traffic. So the spending of the revenues is we are not there yet in terms of even having a geographic location or understanding yet how much revenues could potentially be generated. But we will be having those discussions as we have more information about that. Did that address the question? Is there another piece to it, Ryan? That
I think it generally, yeah, I think it generally addresses it. I think the only other component is just what assurances will drivers have that they'll benefit from the program. And while it's not directly identified, I think it does speak to how a potential program, we would ensure that it's performing in a way that actually does provide those benefits, and that we can make it flexible so that we're not seeing a point where people eventually get to the point where they're paying, but they're not getting the performance they expect out of such a program.
Yeah, to build on what Ryan said, is where the performance measures are going to be really key, both during the study phase as we analyze this, as well as once the program is deployed, should it be deployed, is looking at monitoring and making sure that it's performing like we had identified. Otherwise, looking at how do we make adjustments to make sure that it's performing and hitting those key targets.
Great. Next question related to SB 743. It says SB 743 is supposed to encourage land development policy that creates less vehicle miles traveled. Will the study model future changes in travel due to changes in CEQA and land development requirements related to SB 743? And then ends with a statement or a comment. Theoretically, we should have less VMT and less congestion on freeways as trip distances are reduced. So David, I think you got into this a little bit earlier when you were describing the model and how it works. And I think another part of this question is, what is the flexibility we have in a program to respond to changes that we can't model or forecast over time to ensure that we're still meeting the need with a pilot program?
That's right. Yeah. So a part of the components of the evaluation are really, set out about in terms of the regional travel demand forecast model. That is the primary tool that will be used in this feasibility assessment to evaluate what locations would be appropriate for a pilot study. And as a result, when we look at it from the point of pilot decision to the point of opening, we're talking about a few years where the changes that you would see from more substantial levels of land use changes and or development would be something that we wouldn't necessarily anticipate for the pilot itself. Now, what is different is what would be the longer term impacts of it, and what can we do to anticipate changes and uncertainty between now and when that opening could occur? Certainly, the experiences for all of us over the past 9 months have indicated that there is quite a bit of uncertainty when it comes to both land use, occupancy of both commercial locations as well as retail type locations, and then finally, what it means in terms of our interaction with the transportation system during peak periods as well as during and throughout the day. So all that really is to say is we got a lot of uncertainty. We're going to have to look at it from a sensitivity type of analysis, do a lot of scenario testing to say what if, and all those will help inform the viability of that location for a potential pilot project. All of which is to say that although VMT, and I agree with that with the comment that we should see a reduction in terms of overall vehicle miles traveled as a part of the project. We'll evaluate it within the context of the model. It is a little bit different from the context that's set out by Senate Bill 743, in which case we're not really looking at it from a development perspective, but rather for the achievement of those congestion reduction objectives.
Thanks, David. So there's 2 questions from Clyde Williams coming up. The first, what is the projected employment by SCAG for DTLA between 2020 and 2045? And where does SCAG project the employment in DTLA be provided for by population and household projections and surrounding community plan areas? So I don't think we have that information on hand. I think in terms of the importance of the question for our work, it isn't necessarily specific to DTLA because we don't know if DTLA would be one of those areas yet. But any area that would be a potential concept that we would take into analysis, we would take into all those factors of, what the origin destination patterns, what are the demographics, the economic characteristics of those areas, and consider them as part of the analysis. David, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I fully agree with that. In terms of looking at those longer term projections, it certainly is of interest, and certainly, personally speaking, the responses to the pandemic certainly gives us a little bit of uncertainty, as we just mentioned. But to your point, Ryan, we just don't know yet what locations there are, and certainly we are looking for locations that support a feasibility for the pilot, because we're responding to short-term existing levels of congestion and an inability of the existing system to be able to manage that congestion effectively.
Thanks, David. So his next question, when do we consider congestion pricing for DTLA? And when do we get free ridership on buses and trains? I think we answered this for the most part in the previous question and some others, but note that we haven't arrived at any potential concepts for further exploration as part of this. Downtown LA could be one of those. It could not be one of those. We just don't know yet. That's what we're working on over the next few months to see what areas would potentially be advanced for further exploration. And then the second half after that, when do we get free ridership on buses and trains? Assuming this is related to the Fareless Transit System Initiative, which Joshua mentioned earlier, that study is progressing in parallel with this to a certain extent. We don't know what's going to come out of it. In terms of this study, we're looking at every option out there in terms of what types of policies, strategies, and transportation options would be considered appropriate for a concept. We just don't know yet. And so free transit could be a part of those that emerges. Tam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in terms of the timeline. I'm assuming that you're referring to the Fearless System Initiative that was recently announced by our CEO. And in terms of that timeline, there's a convening of an internal task force to take a look at that and make recommendations by winter of this year. Regardless of what happens with this particular traffic reduction study, that is an exploration that is happening regardless of this. And so it's on a different timeline from this study. And so we'll know more as more details emerge from the work with the Fearless System Initiative.
Thanks, Tam. Next question from Jason. Will driverless app-based vehicles coming online in the next 10 years have a positive effect on traffic, whereas individual auto ownership would decrease? I don't know that we have an answer to this at this time. We don't even know if we'll have those or with definitive certainty in the next 10 years, and we actually don't know the impacts of traffic on them specifically either, or nor their potential impacts on auto ownership. But I don't know if David, if you have anything to add from your experience on broader transportation, if you feel like there are any trends we can identify, or if it's really just the unknown at this point.
You hit the nail on the head. There is so much uncertainty as it comes to automated vehicles and what their impact and contribution will be to overall VMT, vehicle miles traveled, that is, on our roadway system, and what does that mean for vehicle ownership and for the number of vehicle trips. We have seen everything in research from a substantial reduction in trip making to a substantial increase in trip making, and a lot of uncertainty about what it means to have access to an automated vehicle that is not owned directly by the traveler. All these together leave a great deal of uncertainty until we have better understanding as to how people will interact with these technologies and with these services. That being the case, within the pilot evaluation context that we have for the traffic reduction study, we're recognizing that we have to at least identify what the potential interaction could be with automated vehicles, but we're not assuming that there are any substantive numbers of automated vehicles in place for the pilot itself.
Great, thank you. Next question, are any relationships being studied between the reduction in transit fare revenue that would be experienced if transit becomes free and the positive revenue projected for congestion pricing? So I think there's part of this question is for you, David, and how we would potentially estimate the benefits of free transit within a pilot program concept. I think there is a bigger question, Tam, that I don't know if you want to try to address it in terms of how transit fare revenue would it have an impact on our greater transit system or those types of things. And I think it probably goes back to the fareless transit system study that's ongoing. So David, do you want to start with how we'll consider it, and then we can back up to the larger picture?
Absolutely. So that is one of the aspects that can be examined utilizing the modeling tools and simulation tools that will be available for the feasibility assessment. So if there is a decision to both look at a combination of factors for congestion pricing and fareless transit or reduced fare transit, that can be examined all in one as a discrete kind of concept and idea. And that will give us an indication of to what the effects would be in terms of a variety of metrics, including all of the very same traffic reduction metrics we've talked before, but also in terms of what is that in terms of socioeconomic impacts for individuals. Does that help, with disadvantaged or underserved communities and things along those lines? So definitely well within the possibility for study and examination.
Great. And Tam, I think you just explained pretty well the differences in timeline and scope between the transit system, looking at the fareless option versus the study, but do you have anything you'd like to add or just reiterate?
Yeah, and I guess I would just add also that as part of the fareless system initiative that's being explored is our work on a more comprehensive level of looking at pricing across our portfolio of services at Metro. We operate buses, trains, express lanes, bike share, a number of different portfolio of modes. And so we would be exploring how can we make sure that the pricing across these different programs and services are actually in line with our goals of increased ridership or improving ridership, security, safety, user experience, and so on. So that is going to be a longer term study that we're going to be exploring that's related to this traffic reduction study as well as the fareless system initiative.
All right, thank you. A few more questions left. Thank you to everyone who's still hanging on with us. Appreciate it. If congestion pricing goes through, which this person thinks is a bad idea, how will the funds be spent? And then notes, hopefully it'll be on new lines or extending rail lines. I think we've addressed that we're looking at the whole cornucopia of transportation options that would be a part of the transportation improvements package that would be considered, and that it would be, those partners that would be involved in a particular concept we'd work with the community and others to identify what would be the best potential options. Would note that, and Tam, you can add on or deviate from this, that we are really looking at what would work within the timeline of a potential pilot program. So, some rail lines are not planned for construction for quite some time out. And we're looking at those options which could be implemented likely with a preference before a potential pilot program would get on the ground, so that those are in place to make sure that any pricing comes about with people having a lot of additional improved options on the ground to choose from as well. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so just in terms of adding to that, what Ryan said, he covered it pretty well, is that we're looking at infrastructure light, meaning that look at what are the short-term solutions that we can pair and do before a pricing element is on the table. So this is going to mean that in terms of capital infrastructure improvements, that's going to be outside of that time frame likely. But certainly we want to coordinate with all of the investments that Metro is making throughout the region and in projects in Measure M and Measure R to look at where are the improvements occurring over the next few years that could be supplemented with additional improvements that would come out of this study, as well as pairing that with a congestion pricing strategy.
Great. And the next question is related as well. If congestion pricing is introduced, what will be done with the access income from it? Tam, you covered this in the presentation, that there may be additional revenues above and beyond what a program would need to run. And can you just go ahead and dive back into what's our process for identifying that really quickly, and what would be considered? What types of communities would we be looking at investing in?
Sure. And thank you for that question. So certainly we don't know yet how much revenue is going to be generated. We don't have a geographic location yet, but once we have that information, one of the things that we want to make sure is that the net revenues that come out of it would go back and be redistributed and reinvested into the communities that are served or affected by a pilot program. This doesn't just include those who are in the geographic location of a pilot program, but looking at those who are passing through or commuting from other places into that pilot area.
Thanks, Tam. This next question, there's just a couple more left, from Benda Yankor. How are you using data from other cities in order to address the issue of lower income communities being harder adversely affected by a regressive tax? How are you ensuring you are not putting the onus on these communities, but doing the work on your end to ensure an equitable project? So part of this is a data question, I think, for you, David, in terms of what types of data are we going to be considering through the project? Where will it come from? Those types of things to especially address equity. And then Tim, for you, what is our process for ensuring that we're ensuring an equitable outcome in terms of engagement and informing that process?
Yeah.
Right. From the perspective of data, we are fully consistent with Metro's other activities, including the long-range transportation plan development, as well as independent equity development within Metro. So the data that we're looking at from within Los Angeles County is all reflective of those sources as well. So it's all consistent with one another. In terms of the applicable impacts of congestion pricing as it's been experienced elsewhere, we have reached out to individual agencies that have implemented congestion pricing in Europe and Asia to better understand what has been the impact upon lower income individuals. But one thing that they've cautioned for us is that there is a very different context of social welfare within their communities versus that which we have in the United States. So we've been taking that data and putting it essentially through a filter, if you will, to understand that there may be additional elements that we may experience within disadvantaged or underserved communities in the United States that they may not necessarily have experience with in Europe as well. All being said, we are looking at that with a very, very critical eye in terms of the evaluation of any potential pilot project here in Los Angeles County.
And then I'll add on in terms of equity. Really key to this is that we want to improve outcomes for low-income communities. If there are adverse impacts, we want to not only mitigate those impacts of a pilot program, but really looking at how to improve benefits for low-income communities. And so that is going to be part of our analysis, is looking at what groups are going to be affected by a pilot program. How do we mitigate and improve benefits for those groups? And we'll have more information as we get further along in that study, but it's certainly top of mind as we move the study along.
Thanks, Tam and David. So we have 2 questions left. We'll get into those, but for those who are still on the line, if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and please let us know, and we'll answer these 2, and then we'll wrap up unless anything else comes in. So this question: will you be compensating community-based organizations for their time like you do with consultants? Tam, I'll kick this over to you to talk about how we've made space and what options we're considering for that type of effort.
Yes, and thank you for that question. So right now, because we don't actually have a geographic location yet, once we do have more geographic locations, our intent is to partner with community-based organizations to help us engage with those who may be affected by a pilot program. And so we have built into our budget compensating those community-based partners as we work with them to engage with the community.
Thanks, Sam. Last one, would this be part of the road charge program study? You want to go ahead and take that one as well?
Sure, I'll take that one. So this is a separate effort altogether. The road charge program is overseen by the state of California and Caltrans. This is something that is separate. They are looking at road charge as a way to replace fuel tax revenues. However, our study is actually looking at applications to manage demand and not necessarily as a revenue generator. We recognize that revenue may be a byproduct of this, but this is not our goal. Our goal is to manage and reduce traffic congestion and give people more transportation options.
Great, thanks, Tam. Lisa, would you mind just going back to the contact slide real quick? We don't have any more questions, but just wanted to make sure before we close out today that we put up one more time our contact information and ways to get connected with the study. You can reach out to us directly, Tam or myself. You also have the email, trafficreduction@metro.net, the webpage, the metro.net traffic reduction, which has a lot of the materials, FAQs, fact sheets in English and Spanish. To note, we are working on getting a version of the presentation up in both English and Spanish that people can walk through on their own. And we'll go ahead and make efforts to make the answers to these to the questions we've answered today available, as well as the materials from it. So with that, just wanted to thank everyone for their time, and note that there's 3 more meetings come up. There's 2 on Saturday, 1 in English, 1 which will be entirely in Spanish, and then another one next week as well. And note that the 2 that are in English, we will have those issues resolved in terms of the simultaneous Spanish translation to make sure that you can have the option to join any of those 3. Other than that, just wanted to say thank you for everybody's time today. This was a long process for those who stayed on all the way to the end. Really appreciate your interest, and please get in touch with us if there's anything that we can answer for you. Tam, did you have anything to add before we drop off?
No, just to reiterate what Ryan said in terms of feel free to reach out to us. We are glad to engage in additional conversations with you. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you to the team who's working both in the speaking role as well as behind the scenes to make this a smooth process. It was definitely a team effort.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.